Welcome to Chatsunami. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Chatsunami. I'm Satsunami and joining me in this open world of a discussion is my very good friend Adam. Adam, welcome back.
Hang on a second. I just got to climb this radio tower so I can scope out the landscape. So back in a second.
What? I can't hear you up there. What?
Hello. Good to be back.
Yeah, how you doing today, Adam?
I'm not doing too bad, thanks. Not too bad, thanks. Shoulders are a bit fatigued from, as I said, all this climbing, but apart from that, all good.
To be honest, I'm actually surprised you didn't say that it's because you've been carrying the research for this episode.
I'm prone to a bit of exaggeration, but not outright lying. Not yet, anyway.
Oh, give it time. Nah, I'm only kidding.
Give it another year.
No, you have been thoroughly researching this topic. And of course, you might be wondering at home, what topic are we talking about? That, of course, being the age-old question, have open world games reached their limit? Are we tired of them? Are we, I think you'd put it this way before we went to record, have they reached their level of fatigue? Yeah, it is kind of weird because I remember a time where open world games were absolutely revolutionary. And don't get me wrong, I think the concept of open world games have predated even ourselves as old fossils. Yeah, it is strange to think though that people are getting tired of it, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because I can still remember a time when that was a thing that people really wanted, and I remember myself really wanting like more freedom. You're like, oh, I wish I could just explore. I want to break out of the confines of these kind of levels that I'm playing and get into a much more open space. And as you say, now to think we're at a stage where we're like, oh man, put me back in the cage. I hate this free range lifestyle.
Do you know, it is weird because I always remember playing games like Call of Duty and, I mean, maybe Halo to an extent, those kind of games where it was a set story, you went from point A to point B, and people complained about that because although they loved the games, they were like, oh, we want an open world. In fact, I think games like Pokemon even have that to this day. They want an open world MMO kind of experience, and it's never going to happen. But let's let them dream because, yeah, I don't want them angrily banging my door tonight.
Don't take their hope away.
It's all they have, damn it, okay? It's all they have. But yeah, I remember that when I was younger, listening to these kind of opinions, thinking, yeah, I want an open world experience. And even when I got into my first open world experience, this is something we talked about before we came on the show. I was trying to remember, and so were you, but we were trying to remember our first experience with an open world game. I'm going to be honest, I cannot remember. I think it must have been maybe Simpsons Hit and Run. I mean, is that an open world game?
I mean, I would consider it an open world game. I mean, it's by today's standards, you could argue that the open world is quite paltry, in size. And I know it's not one contiguous open world that is divided up. But I would view it as at least, if we judge linear, if we're looking at kind of linear and open world, if you look at it as a scale, I think it's much more towards the open world end of the scale than the strict linear side.
But turning it back on you though, like what would you say your first open world game was?
Do you know what? It could well be Simpsons Hit and Run. It's either that game or it's Shenmue 2. Now Shenmue 2 came out the year before Simpsons Hit and Run, but I can't remember when I played Shenmue 2. I think I might have played it around the same time as Simpsons Hit and Run, so one of those two. I mean, I played some GTAs at friends' houses, but I never owned a copy of GTA until much later. So I only sampled the open world there. I think it was Shenmue 2 or Simpsons Hit and Run was my first proper taste, proper dive into the open world genre.
Do you know, I was the absolute same because my parents wouldn't let me get GTA when I was younger. So there was lots of, I don't want to say bad apples because that makes me sound like an old man, but like these kids who got a copy of like San Andreas, Vice City, they would play the game and then I would just like watch and maybe I would play a little bit. But yeah, I never really got that kind of first hand perspective if that makes sense. It's just weird because even before we came on, we were discussing, about the open world games we've actually played and things like that. And then we kind of got thinking because I started bombarding you with questions. I was like, that meme with the anime man pointing to the butterfly, and he's like, I think it says this a pigeon, but instead it's just me pointing to like Bioshock, saying like, is this an open world game? Yeah, I had a bit of an existential crisis for that though.
It's honestly it's actually much more of a vexing issue than it appears at first. Because when you say it, you're like, oh yeah, I can tell a linear game from an open world game. Well, like, what am I, some kind of noob? Like, this isn't my first rodeo. Then you look at it and you're like, is that a linear game? Is this open world? What do these terms mean anymore? I don't know if you've ever seen the In-Betweeners, but there's an episode where one of the main characters is studying for an exam. He's like, I've been looking at this page for so long. He's like, is this a word? I'm just like me. I'm like, are these words now? So it's a much more taxing issue, I think, to try and like unpack and to try and sort into neat little categories.
Oh no, absolutely, because that's how I felt when I was talking to you about Sonic Adventure. Because technically, you have like a hub worlds in that game, and then I was like, does that count as open world? And I'm like, well, no, because the levels are like really linear, but you've still got the hub world in between, so it's kind of that purgatory between open world and linear games. You're kind of like, what do we even call this? What are you? And it is quite an interesting discussion, but here's a question. See, before we get into like the meat of this episode, when would you say the fatigue for open world games finally struck?
I think the kind of mid to late 2010s, I think, is when it really hit. And I think it was when, because that was a time where a lot of open world game, a lot of AAA open world games seemed to be coming out like basically on top of each other. So, you'd get a lot released in a year, roughly about the same time of the year as well. And I think as well, not to single out like one company, but I am going to single out one company here. I think it was when the Ubisoft model of open world games became fixed, and formalized into what it is now. And I think when it was that kind of, when it became that sort of formalized version of a game, of an open world game, and then there were so many of them being released, I think that's when people started to become quite fatigued with them.
You mean like your Far Cries and your Watch Dogs and things like that?
Divisions, Assassin's Creeds, the list goes on, but yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know though, because on the other hand, you have to look at companies like Rockstar as well. Don't get me wrong, they have kind of revolutionised it in a way, but nowadays it kind of seems very old hat. Because when you think of open world games, other than Minecraft, obviously, which came out in 2011, I think?
Yeah.
Like the Super Mario 64 argument, isn't it? Oh, think of the impact GTA had. But it really did, because it was like depending on what game you go to, but it was relatively like a big, large scale environment and everything, and you could go through it. But I think by about 2012, 2013, I think that those were the kind of times where games like GTA 5 and Skyrim and maybe Fallout, if you want to, I know that was technically before and after with 3 and 4, but those kind of series were coming out at that time and everyone was excited. But I mean, see, after that, can you think of many, other than Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, but can you think of many open world games that hit its stride as much as like GTA 5 or Skyrim?
Oh, it's a good question. Certainly, people still enjoyed. Well, Batman Arkham City was around that same time as well, and that was obviously very popular. And that kind of, as much as Arkham Asylum had some sort of open worldy, Arkham City was much more of an open world environment. Assassin's Creed Black Flag was 2013. That was, some people might argue, like the last like great Assassin's. Oh, again, very personal opinion, but that was the last great Assassin's Creed. There was Middle Earth: Shadow of Mordor, that was well received. That people really enjoyed that as well with its open world. So the Just Cause series as well. I think Just Cause 3 was 2015, and that was one that people really liked. And that was much more of a kind of sandboxy open world, where you could have a big impact on the environment, much more than you can in a game like Skyrim or Assassin's Creed or Fallout or something like that. There were still games. Rockstar, obviously, the ones I think are perhaps most synonymous. Well, probably Rockstar and Bethesda, are probably the two you'd think of more positively. I mean, I know Bethesda have faced some criticism from some of their recent efforts, but those two companies are probably the ones you most associate the best with kind of open world experiences.
There is one you're forgetting though, and I know why you're forgetting that. The
What is
Witcher
it?
3.
Oh, of course. God, you can tell I've not played that one. You're completely right. The one that everybody kind of holds up as the greatest game ever. So my bad.
I wouldn't blame you, because after The Witcher 3, like, what came next? There was like the DLC and everything which came after, and everybody loved that. Then there was Cyberpunk. On the note of segueing awkwardly into the main discussion, will we just jump into it?
I mean, I can think of no better way. So let's go.
Okie doke. So, yeah, we will go away, climb this radio tower, and we will be right back after these transmissions. Welcome to Chatsunami, a variety podcast that talks about topics from gaming and films to streaming and general interests.
Previously on Chatsunami, we discussed Game of the Decade, Deadly Premonition, the romantic thriller, Birdemic, and listen to us get all sappy as we discuss our top 5 Christmas films.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, then you can find us on Anchor, Spotify, YouTube, and all good podcast apps. As always, stay safe,
Stay awesome, and most importantly,
stay hydrated.
We are Beer and Chill Podcast.
Podcast where we review TV shows, games, movies, and whatever else takes our fancy.
So what are you waiting for? If you're a cool kid like us, you're gonna listen to the Beer and Chill Podcast. You can get it anywhere from Spotify all the way to your grandmother's radio. My name is Jan.
And I'm Craigie C.
And we are
Beer and Chill.
Oh, God, that is a lot of steps. Oh, we're back. So, Adam, I'm going to turn it back on to you because you, of course, alongside me, we are both history buffs, as it were. That's not a humble brag, by the way, but we do like a bit of history, don't we?
we like it. We like a little smattering here and there,
Yeah, a little
or a great big dollop in my case.
There's nothing wrong with that, and Yeah, what you guys don't know is, like, the list for Chatsunami recommended episodes is just nothing but history episodes.
Be warned. That will be coming soon, probably.
Yes, we are like the Bill Nyes of history games. I couldn't think of anybody else off the top of my head.
We're the Citizen Kane of history games.
I wish I'd said that now. So, Adam, what is the history behind, like, these open world games? Because I know you were doing, like, a lot of research into this particular topic, but would you say that open world games kind of became more prominent in the modern era of gaming as opposed to, like, back in the day where we had very much a linear scene?
To an extent, yes, but what was kind of surprising researching this, well, certainly what I found surprising, was actually the kind of history of open world games and how far you can actually date them back. Again, now a lot of this is kind of semantics in a way, because a lot of these games from the 70s and 80s don't, if you were to compare them to an open world game now, they don't really look, they're not kind of alike in that way, but they still are, they still are on that kind of open world spectrum. So, I mean, we were talking about this before we started, but if you think about things like text adventures, from the kind of late 70s, early 80s, even beyond that, like, they have a certain open world element to them in that you have a kind of freedom, you have a freedom of exploration, you have choices of where to go. It's not, you're not always getting funneled down a specific way. So you can kind of look at those as almost the kind of progenitors. You had a lot of kind of early role-playing games in the early 80s, things like Ultima, which were kind of D&D inspired, but kind of put you in a much more open world and gave you some freedom to choose, to kind of plot your own adventure. I mean, if you then go to like the late 80s, we start seeing Nintendo started to kind of dip their feet into the open world environment. The first Legend of Zelda is very much an open world in that you're kind of plonked into the map of Hyrule, and you have these different dungeons that you need to complete to progress the game. But there is a certain freedom to, tackle those in an order that you want. I mean, you can only do it to a certain extent because sometimes you need specific items for specific dungeons, but there is a level of much more freedom than in something like Mario, for instance. The same year we had the first Metroid game. That was, again, very much open world. Again, with these kind of Metroidvanias, it's that way in that, you open up the map as you get more skills and abilities and everything. But the first Metroid game, I think, is pretty noteworthy for having, for maybe being too, open in a sense and having too much open at the beginning. But so that's another one. I think famed game developer Sid Meier's made some games that kind of in the open world mold. Like his Pirates one, from what I understand, is a bit kind of sandboxy. And then as you get into the kind of 90s, you obviously have things like Grand Theft Auto starting, and even those kind of first, before we get to the 3D Grand Theft Autos, those kind of 2D top-down versions, that was an open world, where you were given freedom to kind of go around and do different tasks. Super Mario 64, you could argue to an extent has an open world. I mean, it's more of a kind of hub world, but the levels inside Super Mario are open to an extent, and you're given a chance to kind of move around and explore them and everything. And then, obviously, as GTAs went into the kind of 3D environments, it got much bigger. We got things like the Shenmue series, Simpsons Hit and Run, as we said. The Elder Scrolls games obviously started a bit earlier, but became much more open world, especially with things like Morrowind and obviously Oblivion. We got the Fallout series as well, so it kind of just snowballed into what we have now with things like Far Cry and Assassin's Creed and everything like that. So it is quite a long history, but again, it's that way of, with it being a kind of, it's not quite an objective thing, it is a bit subjective of what you consider to be an open world, and so you might look at some things and be like, no, I wouldn't consider that open world, but somebody else might. So it is like a fairly long history in gaming of kind of the open world genre. It's just that obviously it's grown in so much in kind of scope and size, and also as well in the way these games play and the kind of format and everything. But there's certainly, I think you can certainly trace it back. You can certainly trace the kind of open world genre back quite far.
It is amazing though, thinking back to when we were growing up and how, I mean, you did mention games like Super Mario 64, or even look at games like Banjo-Kazooie. Is that open world? Because it's got this huge hub world where you've got secrets within the hub world, but then you've also got the levels as well within that. So does that count? There's probably a lot of angry Banjo-Kazooie fans no, it's a platforming experience, you don't understand. By the way, I'm a huge Banjo-Kazooie fan, just want to point that out. But yeah, games like that were definitely pushing the boundaries for what they could do. And I remember, as I said, being really young thinking, oh, it'd be so cool if you were able to explore this area or that area. And you had to wait years and years until we got games like that. Because, I mean, there were so many open world games. I remember when Skyrim came out, and initially I wasn't sure if I was going to like it. I think the reason that I probably prefer Skyrim to a game like Fallout was because I played Skyrim first. I absolutely fell head over heels with it. Thought, wow, this is amazing, You can customize your character, you can explore this vast world and everything. You also had games like Red Dead Redemption, which again, absolutely loved that. I thought the scope, the absolute scale of it was fantastic. Even playing games like GTA 5, for example, that blew my mind in 2013 when I played it, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. Same with Assassin's Creed, the very first one, before they went to Italy. But I mean, that was great as well. And I know I'm kind of repeating myself saying, yes, great.exe, but genuinely, those were so refreshing coming from games where, like Call of Duty, Battlefield, Halo, where they kept you in a single track road. And even games like Pokemon, because Pokemon, technically that's open world, but a lot of RPGs do follow that kind of thing. I think it's more an RPG thing than it is an open world thing, but I mean, you could potentially argue it's open world, but at the same time, it didn't have the same scope as these games had. Going forward from that time, obviously there are the diamonds in the rough. The rough, of course, being people complaining about the sheer volume of open world games, but it is weird to see because, as we said before, we have games like Minecraft, which to this day still are absolutely popular. And here's a question before I start throwing compliments to this genre. What is it about open world games that you like, Adam?
I think a lot of it is that sense of freedom when you get the ability to kind of do sort of, quote unquote, do anything or go anywhere. There is a very kind of liberating sense there, and it can be like a really great. It can make you feel great just to have that ability to kind of choose and be like, no, mate, I don't want to do this. I want to go over here, or I want to explore and find what I can. And when I think about playing some open world games, I think some of my favorite moments in gaming have come from sort of open world games, and even from some games that I don't particularly like, or that I never finished, or I wouldn't go back and play again. Like, so for instance, I think about Oblivion, the fourth Elder Scrolls game. It's a game I didn't play that much of. It's a game I probably wouldn't go back and play now, to be honest. But I remember after doing the kind of opening kind of segments of Oblivion, after you basically start in a prison and you meet the Emperor and you basically escape, and then your kind of quest starts from there. And I remember not long after that just kind of being put into the kind of big world of Cyrodiil and being like, wow, and I was like, okay, right, I'm gonna follow the kind of quest marker and head there. But I remember coming across like a ruin and just being like, oh, I'm going to go and explore this. And, and just that sense, I was just like, wow, this just feels awesome, in a way you'd never be able to do in a much more restricted game. I think as well, some open world games have made genuinely amazing environments to explore. Like, we can argue how much this is an open world game, but the first BioShock, I just absolutely loved, like, just exploring, like, the ruins of Rapture and just poking around and just, finding all these different, like, shops and apartments and, like, public areas and just like piecing together what happened in Rapture. And again, we can argue how much of an open world game that is, but you certainly get a large amount of freedom within each environment to kind of explore. Even kind of more recent games, I recently in the last few months finished up Metro Exodus, which again is not a totally open world game, but has several kind of big, large open world environments, and just being able to kind of plot my way through there and finding all these different kind of areas and these ruins and these kind of the inhabitants living there and everything was just so great. And I was just like, it's just an experience I don't think you can get all the time in a more linear kind of crafted experience. So yeah, I think really the kind of freedom and just the exhilaration that you can get from kind of open worlds, and if they can create a really like compelling environment, it's just something that I think is a very unique strength to open world, and I'm not sure you can quite replicate those with a more sort of linear experience.
I definitely think it is the first time you go into the world of that particular game, isn't it? Like, seeing the Northern Lights for the first time in Skyrim, or seeing the sunset in GTA or something. Like, did you feel like that as well?
Yeah, I think open worlds can really help you get immersed into the environment, into the world, into the story. I think they are very good at doing that. If they're done well, you really do just want to dive in and just you really can like role play and imagine yourself in this place.
Usually for these AAA open world games, it's usually a chance for these publishers and developers to showcase not only like the power of the console that they're going to be putting it on, but their own technical fortitude to show off their creativity, to show off this game that's going to be fun. I have so many memories of playing games like Red Dead Redemption, the first one, with friends, and they're the only reason that I actually bought Red Dead Redemption, because they were like, oh, is this cool cowboy game, we're all going to buy it. And I was like, I don't know if I want it. I bought it anyway, got it for my 18th birthday, absolutely loved it. I remember like running from the police in the game while my friend rode like a zebra and I was like on a really slow donkey riding behind him. There was just so many great memories from that. You mentioned as well, there's the Arkham series for Batman, especially Arkham City. There was the Elder Scrolls series. Also, there's actually, I'm going to come back to it, but Spider-Man as well was a fantastic experience. That really took me by surprise. But I will get to that. I know Green Shield, our very good friend and occasional co-host for the Chatsunami series, will be listening to this. Yes, The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild is a good experience. It's okay, Adam. I've said it in your behalf.
Is that your official recommend? Is that your official review? It's okay.
Yeah, it's a game.
Put that on the box.
It's a game. Thumbs up. It's a game, guys. Because I feel as if people would mention it. People would mention it if we didn't talk about it.
Yeah,
So
a few people might bring up that we didn't mention apparently one of the best games ever made.
there's also, speaking of best games ever made, there's also Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, Woho indeed. And of course, you've got Horizon Zero Dawn, which is another critically acclaimed one. But there's actually one open world game that you haven't mentioned, and I would argue is quite possibly one of my favourite open world games.
Ooh, Deadly Premonition.
It is indeed.
There we go.
Because Deadly Premonition, if you go back and listen to our episodes on Deadly Premonition, you'll know that that was one of the games that actually, brought Adam and I closer together, isn't it?
Indeed, it's in that respect you could argue it's the best game ever made, just for that fact, to be honest.
Absolutely, we wouldn't be here without that game, so thank you, Sweaty65, for your mad cap ideas. But yeah, the thing about open world games as well is I think people underestimate the social aspect of it as well, and obviously this is more of a relatively new thing, with the development of the internet and the infrastructure there, where people can play online together now. Nowadays it's kind of an expected feature. You think, oh, has it got multiplayer? Ah, yes, unless you go the No Man's Sky route, but yeah, let's not go into that. Yeah, it's just so interesting to see. But yeah, it's just so interesting to see people come together, create all these like amazing memories together, to explore these kind of vast worlds and go into like this deep story as they, venture through the land in their own way. It's a really underestimated, but I think very important aspect of open world games. But if that was the case, for every open world game, then we probably wouldn't be doing this episode. And from what I've seen after researching this topic myself, it seems as if a lot of content creators and gamers feel the same way. So kind of to segue on maybe the negative aspects of open world, I'll give the floor back to you, Adam, but what would you say the negative kind of role is with open world games?
Again, personally for me, I think it's going to be the time investment is one thing. A lot of these games are hefty in terms of content and length, and sometimes that's good, but a lot of other times if you a lot of other things going on in your life, you're busy, you don't have as much time to devote to gaming, and the thought sometimes of going into these games is overwhelming, and you're just like, I don't think I can do it. I think as well, again, maybe a more personal, depending on how you feel about this kind of issue, but an advantage with a more linear game is that it's a much more kind of crafted, and usually a much more crafted and tightly designed experience. It has a much more focused and succinct story in a way, there's much better kind of pacing, and the story has more direction, while sometimes with an open world game, as much as there's a story, you can get disjointed, and like you might go long periods without doing kind of story main mission content, and so the story kind of becomes disjointed. You're like, what am I doing again? And the stakes get lost, especially if you think about I think the most notorious one for this is Fallout 4 for me. Like, so with Fallout 4, the game starts, you go into the bunker with your husband or your wife and your baby as the nuclear bombs start falling, and then at some point in time you're like awoken from your kind of cryo sleep, and your partner is killed and your baby is like taken away, and you go back in cryo sleep, then you wake up at another point, and then you have to track down your baby and find them. So that's your kind of main story. However, being a Bethesda game, you'll get absolutely like laden with side quests and everything else, and just exploring the world. And so the game, as much as finding your child should be your number one priority, the game almost discourages you from that. So it kind of feels at odds with the story. I think as well, again, and this is more apt to some open world games than others, but it's the kind of, argue like the drudgery and repetition of tasks. We all know how many, like, we're just joking about how many towers we have to climb to open the map up, how many bandit camps you have to like liberate, chests to find. There's a lot of repetition of tasks that I think really can weigh you down. And especially, I remember when I was playing Assassin's Creed Unity, so the one set in Paris during the French Revolution, I remember opening the map for the first time, and I could barely see the map through the absolute like litter of icons that were strewn all across the map. And I just remember being like, oh my god, like how am I ever going to like be able to tackle anywhere close to all this stuff? So yeah, I think those are the sort of main problems, if you'd say, with open world games.
To kind of add on to that, it's something you kind of mentioned with Fallout 4, which is an absolutely fantastic point about the story for open world games. You know, it's the same with even games that I love. For example, Deadly Premonition or Red Dead Redemption, where either you're hunting a serial killer or you're working for the government, but somehow you still have time to mess about and eat a Sinner sandwich or herd some cows and things, you know. It doesn't work as well story-wise. It's a bit like the Far Cry series, because I know their whole thing is, oh, you're trapped in a desert island or, you know, a very remote place, and you have to like clear out these bandit camps. I know they're probably not bandit camps, but you know what I mean, like these areas that are fortified by enemies, and you have to be a war criminal version of Kevin McAllister, where you set up all the booby traps and things and blow them up, and again, as you said, find a tower and things, and that takes away from kind of the urgency of the story. It's not like, remember Prince of Persia, the old one, where it was like on a time limit?
Oh, the what, like Sands of Time and stuff, or
Yeah, even before that, like the original game
oh,
was
like the original ones. I get you.
yeah, that was like very time sensitive. And don't get me wrong, like I'm not advocating for like a timer or a time limit for these kind of games, but at the same time, narratively, it doesn't work as well. And going back to something you said as well, talking about the content of like the map and things, where you see all the icons and things, you really get a sense of FOMO, you know, like a fear of missing out on this content, on character interactions and things. And I'm not saying like too much content can necessarily be a bad thing, but you do get people who they'll go into an open world game and then there's just nothing there. And you think, well, what's the point then of having a big open world game and having absolutely nothing in it? Because have you ever done that before? Have you ever gone into like an open world game and just thought, wow, there's nothing here?
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. The example that always springs to mind for me is LA Noire, where they made an accurate presentation of 1940s Los Angeles, which is a great achievement. And don't get me wrong, like it's impressive they did that, and you know it's kind of cool to be able to visit some of these old landmarks, like the old Intolerance set or the kind of LA like public library. You know, it's kind of cool to see those, but it was a game that really didn't need an open world, and you could tell that they put it in there to kind of to pad out the game a bit, and also so they could include driving as a kind of central mechanic, which you know is okay to an extent, but it did mean a lot of like it did kind of break the pace a lot, where you're like, oh my god, I got to travel from this crime scene all the way back to the police station or to the morgue or you know to somewhere else, wherever. It really kind of broke that up, and there was just nothing. There was a couple of things to find, some collectibles and stuff, but there was no fun to really exploring that world, and it felt like going for a kind of, you know, an art gallery or museum. You know, you're not able to, you just kind of have to stare at the things, and you can't really interact with them in a way that you could do with a game like Minecraft or like a Just Cause or even like a GTA or something like that.
And that actually leads on to the third point that I was going to make, so thank you for that. The idea of traversal as well within the open world, I feel as if it makes or breaks a game. In games like maybe Skyrim or Red Dead Redemption, you start off walking through, you know, the land, and eventually you'll get your horse and everything, and that'll speed things up. And then you get games like Spider-Man, the one that came out in 2018 for the PlayStation 4, and I think is actually coming out for the PC, which, fun fact, that was absolutely fantastic. And the reason wasn't just because they recreated New York for the game, although that was pretty impressive, but it was mainly because of how good Spider-Man felt to swing through the city, and you were going so fast, you could jump off of rooftops, you could swing. I'm not as well versed in Arkham City, but was it the kind of same experience for that?
Oh yeah, I think if you were to like poll people, that would probably be one of their favorite things about especially Arkham City and Arkham Knight, was the kind of like really fluid and fast traversal. Batman's glide allowed you to travel like long distances really fast. You could glide down and then shoot yourself back up to gain speed and altitude, and it was a really like, especially Arkham Knight really perfected it and just made it a fantastic traversal system. But you're totally right in that way. Like it can add something when you're not having to sort of trudge your way through on like foot or on horseback. If you have a kind of cool way to get around, that was the great strength of the Assassin's Creed series when it first started out. I remember how great it was to, as clunky as it probably is now to play. Like I've not played the original Assassin's Creed game in over 10 years. Like I remember playing it the first time and doing the rerunning parkour and like diving over rooftops, and climbing things. It felt great to just kind of dash around this environment. And I think as well that kind of helps you get away from, you might argue, the scourge of fast travel. It kind of feels like open world games, you reach that point where you're just like, oh right, I just want to get there, right? Just I've unlocked these fast travel points now, let's use them. And that kind of, you might argue, renders the open world like obsolete.
Would you say though that open world games nowadays have a problem of surplus? So what I mean by that is there's like too much going on. And the example I always bring up, and I'm probably going to attract a lot of heat for this, so after this episode, Adam, save yourself, but Red Dead Redemption 2 is always my go-to example compared to the first one, because I remember, as I said, I remember playing Red Dead Redemption, absolutely loving it, going through the Wild West, shooting bandits and things, playing with friends. So when I got the second game, I was so excited because I was like, oh, it's going to be just like the old days, I'm going to be shooting up bandits and things. And I don't know whether it's just the fact I've got older or what it is. And don't get me wrong, this isn't a slight to the developers who actually sat and coded horse testicles shrinking in the cold. Why that was in the game, I don't know, but the attention to detail is absolutely insane. I can't deny that, and I can't deny the absolute talent that went into creating the game. But would you say there is like too much of a good thing when it comes to like micromanaging in these kind of games?
I think it depends on what you're doing. Like, if there's a lot of things, but there's a lot of variety, I don't think it can be so much of an issue. I mean, I've not played the game, but I know lots of people love The Witcher 3 because of, the kind of the variety of the side missions and the fact that each kind of feels like a kind of crafted experience rather than a copy and paste type of job. While if you think about like the Ubisoft kind of model of open world, it feels like you get a checklist of things to do. So it's like, get all these chests, and clear all these bandit camps, climb all these towers, find all these landmarks, whatever it is. So I think in that sense, when there's a surplus of those kind of repetitive tasks, Fallout 4 was notorious for the Preston Garvey, the Minutemen, I can't remember what the faction was called, but those tasks was like, oh, another settlement needs, it was a meme to death by the end. So when you get that kind of boring repetition of just the same task, it really kind of kills your enthusiasm for it. And it's sort of what happened to me when the last Assassin's Creed game I played was Odyssey. It's the one set in ancient Greece, and it's a gorgeous looking game. And the world of ancient Greece that they've made is great. It looks great. There's like great landmarks to find. There's a lot of fun to explore around it. But I just remember being like, I'm having fun exploring this, but like, oh my god, what am I doing? Like, I'm just exploring to clear another bandit camp, find another chest, and it just absolutely killed my interest in that game. I found it one of those boring things to play, despite the kind of beautiful backdrop that I was going through. The fact that I was having to repeat the same tasks again absolutely destroyed my enthusiasm for it. So for me, it depends on what you're doing. If there's lots of variety, I don't think it's a bad thing. But I think if it's a lot of the same things, that's what really can kill the kind of open world experience. I think part of the problem, is a kind of trend that developed in gaming, like from the kind of, I'd say mostly in the 2010s, maybe the late 2000s, 2010s. And it felt like as games got more expensive, people expected them to last longer, that they would be able to devote more time to them. And it felt in a way that this is kind of where this trend of just repetitive tasks and large environments just kind of exploded. People were like, well, I'm plonking down, 60 quid for a new game. I want to get at least 20 hours out of it. And, I can understand that logic, but I do think it did, I do think it did some harm, especially because I do think it just led people to be like, right, here's one bandit camp, right? Let's copy and paste this like 100 times now and just like spread it out across this like vast environment.
Do you remember a game called Dying Light 2, the zombie
Yeah,
one?
like I've not played either of the Dying Lights, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, me neither. But there was like a really infamous thing going around where they were saying how, oh, it'll take 500 hours for you to complete it. And then it turned out it was like, oh no, it's only 500 hours to complete it 100% or something like that. And it's like, oh, the actual game will take, can't even remember, I think it was 70 hours or something. I could be completely wrong. But it does feel weird when people say that a game, or rather they judge a game based on how long the game itself is going to last, because some of the best games I've ever played, and this is making me sound like an indie fanatic, but some of the best games I've ever played, like What Remains of Edith Finch, To the Moon, you know, kind of to quote recent games that we've been talking about, those are some of the best games that I have ever played, and they're only about 3 hours max, maybe? I mean, technically, What Remains of Edith Finch, you could speedrun it in 35 minutes. Trust me, I did look it up. But that is the weird thing, though. I just can't believe that you'll get games like that that are so short, yet because of the length of them, people might kind of scoff and say, oh, I don't want to play that because it's too short. But why, though? It goes back to something you were saying earlier, but like nowadays, I find myself going towards a lot of shorter games and a lot more linear games because, you know, getting old, it's tiring. Not to sound depressing, but I'm reaching the big 3-0 soon, and sometimes you just want a game that either you're familiar with or you want a game that you can just play from start to finish and then say, that was a great game, and then kind of hang it up on the shelf. And that's not to say that everybody my age or our age rather feels that way. There will be people out there who still love GTA. And then there's those very strange streamers who'll stream it with all the absolutely crazy mods. Go you. At the same time, I don't know, making a game larger and better just for the sake of it, just for the sake of hours and kind of artificial content, if that makes sense. You know, it's not something that seems organic. It's not something you think, oh, this is a natural progression. We're going to get like a lot of content in here. It's just stuff, really. And that's what really makes me quite sad about it. Gaming is there to kind of push the boundaries, and we see that in a lot of genres, but when it comes to open world games, there is only so much you can do before you start just stuffing things into the game and making it a collectathon. And going back to what I said earlier, I mean, I'm a Banjo-Kazooie fan. I know exactly what that feels like. And I mean, even in the Banjo-Kazooie spiritual successor, Ukulele, that was criticised for being like a big open world, but with nothing really in between. A bit like what you were saying about L.A. Noire. It's like, it has to be rewarding. Would you agree that there has to be kind of a reward for exploring, or rather a worthwhile reward?
Yeah, I think as well, it kind of comes down to the world that's there, like the environment. You kind of, well, for me personally, I want to get myself immersed in the world, in the environment, so it kind of comes down to how that's created, or like having a good reason for being in there. So last year I played Far Cry 3, which is over 10 years old now, but is one of these games that I think also helped to kind of popularize, in many ways, both for good and for bad, the sort of Ubisoft model of open world games. But that game gave you a good, I don't think the environment's always the best, because it's kind of a lot of like jungle. To be honest, it's not like, it's kind of difficult to tell sometimes where you are, you know, without going to like the overworld map. But like the game gave you quite a good reason for being there, in that you're like this basically bratty like this American college teen with his like asshole friends who like crash land on this island, which is this base for these pirates, and you get your friends get captured and you escape, and you basically need to like free your friends, and you meet up with this kind of tribe of natives who are on the island, and you go on this sort of like Heart of Darkness, almost Apocalypse Now journey, and you know as you take copious amounts of like hallucinogenic drugs, and you turn yourself into a warrior basically. And so that kind of gave you a good reason to be in the world, because you're like, right, I'm like, you know, I'm building myself up and I'm getting better equipment and I'm training, you know, for this task of like freeing my friends. So that was a good reason to be in the world. And something like Skyrim, which I just thought was a really compelling world, and I just really wanted to explore. So I think games like that have these great worlds, these great worlds that are built and developed, and you really want to like poke around and explore, I think is a good reason. But as well as you say as well, whatever the reward is, I do think there has to, as you say, has to be something to like encourage you to go forward, because otherwise it's just like, what's the point in putting 20 hours into this if you're not going to get anything from it?
So linking back to the question we proposed at the beginning of this episode, where we said, have open world games reached their limit in terms of either their story, their gameplay, really just the presentation in the kind of modern gaming landscape? Do you think, Adam, that they have reached this limit? And if you do think that, how do you think they could kind of revitalise themselves?
I think to an extent they have reached a limit, but I think it's very much that model of, and I'm going to keep saying the Ubisoft model, but that kind of large open world with the checklists of very repetitive tasks, I think has reached its limit, and I have really no interest in experiencing those anymore, because I've played them and I'm like, it's just going to be the same thing that I've done before. But I do think there still is potential for the open world. However, I think open world games can kind of revitalize themselves by scaling down, by creating kind of smaller environments, but much more detailed, much more immersive environments. So something like Deus Ex Mankind Divided, which was the last Deus Ex game released, which is, it's a pretty good game. Like, I don't think it's anything spectacular. But one thing that it has a great kind of central hub world, which is basically kind of a section of Prague. And it's pretty small, like it wouldn't take you long to explore all of it, but it's so intensely detailed. And you have the ability to go into so many different buildings and shops and apartments, and there's these great stories for you to uncover, and you'll find different things in these different buildings and apartments, that provoke further questions. And some might lead you to like side missions, some might just be like environmental storytelling and details that you'll find. As well, it's a reactive world. It's the kind of way that if you kill a shopkeeper in the game, basically the next time you come back, it'll be like a police crime scene. And then if you come back later on than that, the shop will be closed and boarded up, and it'll have the police tape and everything. So it gives you a sense of like you can have an impact on this world. So I think that's the way to go. I mean, I just finished up Prey, the last Prey game, which was released in 2017, which has like a kind of open world that's set in this sort of space station. It's quite big, but it's still fairly small and contained, and the spaceship's kind of divided up into different sections. And I had like such a good time just exploring that and kind of poking around. And you'd get to a new sort of area of the space station. I was like, right, I want to like poke into every room and every nook and cranny and find out what I can, whether it be mission specific stuff, side missions, or just like kind of cool details, all these different details you can find. So for me, that's the way I think open world games should potentially go. I mean, I still think there's room for these kind of much bigger experiences, and companies can still make them. I still think I understand what you're saying about Rockstar, and perhaps it's getting packed. They're packing the things with just too much detail now, but I still think there is a space for those type of games. I just think it's the fact that perhaps there's too many of them now, and it's just becoming, that it's the oversaturation and it's creating fatigue. So I would champion much more contained, smaller, but much more highly detailed environments, because I think that just helps immerse the player so much more, and really highlights the strengths of what an open world environment can do, while as compared to a much more linear space.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head with it. It's one of those things, though, where although there's lots of variations of the open world genre, and as you said, there's the Ubisoft model, there's the Rockstar model, but at the end of the day, it's more or less what we make of it. And I know this is going to sound maybe quite cheesy, and it deserves to be in like a greeting card or something like that, but open world games do have a special place in people's hearts. And I know I've kind of been quite critical on open world games, but I don't want you listeners out there to think that I'm in any way against open world games. As I said, some of my favourite games of the genre, as I said, Spider-Man, Deadly Premonition, Skyrim, even Fallout to an extent, Red Dead Redemption, the original, all of these games, I have so many fond memories of them. Exploring the landscape, making memories with my friends as well and things. Of course, there's also Halo Infinite, but we did a whole episode on that, so I won't linger on that too long. But the fact is, these games can hold a special place in people's hearts. But when you have, as you said, the Ubisoft model where you churn out these very soulless games, not that I'm saying every game has to be GTA levels, but I always remember playing Watch Dogs. When I played played it for the first time, I remember how stiff it felt playing it. And, you know, there was a controversy behind how the character was supposed to be, you know, very highly detailed. And when you actually got into the world, it was as if you were driving a bumper car and people didn't react around you. Slight spoilers for anyone out there if you're listening, but for Watch Dogs, I always remember there was a particular subplot, and I think I've told you about this, Adam, where you have to hunt down a serial killer. And I remember the first time, because I was exploring, and I accidentally came across like this body wrapped in plastic with a camera facing it. And before you ask, no, it wasn't Laura Palmer. But yeah, it was quite interesting. You thought, oh my god, you know, this is really spooky and weird. You know, you have to go to all the different locations to find the other bodies before you meet up with the actual murderer. So, you know, this goes on for ages until you finally see him and you're about to catch him before he gets his next victim. And then it just kind of plays out like any other normal interaction, like as if you're stopping a mugger or something like that. You just go up to him, you smack him on the back of the head, that's it. Nobody says anything, there's no reaction to it, there's no change in the gaming world. And that is the main issue, I think. Open world games have to be reactive if they're going to be engaging, because if they're not reactive, then why should we as gamers put all our time into these kind of games? And I mean, even look at games like Sleeping Dogs, which is by far one of my favourite games, where you play as a undercover police officer who infiltrates the Hong Kong triads. In that, you build up a thing called Face, or what's the other thing as well? I think, is it Face? And like, there's a kind of police bar that goes up in the criminal one.
Oh, I know the things you mean. I can't remember what they're called either, but I think Face is one of them. And you're right. There's like a police, whatever it's called.
Yeah, it was like, depending on whether you were like a good character or a bad character, you know, these bars would kind of go up, and it would depend how certain people treated you. I honestly, like, to this day, I still think it's fantastic. It had such a good twist on the open world genre. Yeah, all I'm saying is I want Sleeping Dogs 2, Adam. That's what keeps me up at night.
Make it happen. I actually can't believe it's not happened, because I feel like it feels like the kind of thing that somebody would have picked up by now. Well, maybe there is something happening. We just don't know.
Well, there was supposed to be a film coming out.
Really?
Yeah, it was supposed to be Donnie Yen, who was like the lead actor in it.
I mean, no offense to Donnie Yen, but not quite the Sleeping Dogs 2 I was hoping for.
I mean, back in the day, I know he's a bit older now, but with all his films where he takes like a more, I say a more martial art role, like Ip Man and things like that, rather than Rogue One, because I know as soon as I said Donnie Yen, I'm sure your head went to Rogue One, and it went to, oh no.
My head went to, I want to play this game, I don't want to watch the film.
So you don't want Sleeping Dogs 2 directed by David Cage?
No, I mean, I don't want that. I don't want a film version directed by David Cage. I also don't want a game version directed by David Cage.
Well, I can't blame you, Adam. I can't blame you. And speaking of changing the subject, yeah, let's talk a little about the other side of the coin here. That, of course, being linear games. I would say since its inception, video games have always had this kind of linearity to them. You know, you get from point A to point B, and that used to be enough for a lot of people, but nowadays there's just so many forms of gaming that everyone has their different tastes. You've got your RPGers, your indie gamers, shout out to Craigie C if he's listening. You've got your FPS guys, your platformers and things, so it's just like so widespread, but the kind of unifying umbrella between them is, are they more of an open world experience, like for example Elden Ring, which has just come out? Well, it came out earlier in the year, but you know, something like that, or should games really lean more into the linear side because that's what they used to be like, and now they've kind of evolved into these open world experiences? So what do you think about that, Adam?
Well, it's funny, I was just thinking there, I mean, we've been talking obviously about the fatigue of open world games, but I think maybe one of the first fatigue things in gaming was with the linear cinematic gaming experience, you know, with like a heavy kind of focus focus on set pieces and action scenes where there was kind of limited involvement, quick time events or chase sequences. So it's funny to think that that was almost the first kind of thing that everybody was like, oh, just no more of this. Give us some freedom. And now perhaps we're reaching a point where it's like, no, give us more. We want more kind of scripted, crafted experiences rather than these kind of more open-ended adventures that we've been having for the last few years. I mean, it's difficult to say what gaming should do, because I think it's just so highly subjective. If I was to make a list of my 10 favorite games, probably most of them would probably fall more on the linear side of the scale in the open world. But I don't know. I feel personally, for me, I remember when I was really into open world games, but I also remember when I really fell away from them. And I can tell you the exact game that drove me away from open world games was Metal Gear Solid 5. In the fact that it took me 6 months to complete that game, and I was like, I don't want to do this again. I want much more tighter and shorter experiences. And so I was very much focused on that, and then playing things like Assassin's Creed Odyssey just reinforced that opinion for me. But recently I've come back more to open world games. And I've not completely gone away from linear experiences. I like to kind of balance. I personally like to balance them out. Sometimes I like to play in longer games. As I said, I've just finished Prey recently, but I don't think I'd want to jump right into another open world experience right now. I'd want to play a couple more shorter games. So I don't know, I feel like I fall in the middle. As I say, my favorite is the sort of hub world model of, having a kind of open world environment, but it being kind of smaller, more contained, and kind of highly detailed. And then if you want to just set the whole game there, that's cool. But if you also want to branch out to have more linear sections, sort of like Halo Infinite has, then I think I like that as well. So I don't know. For me now, I kind of fall in the middle, and I don't know. I can see there's benefits to both sides, but I don't know. I don't know if one side, in my view, has the kind of upper hand on the other. What do you think, though? Do you fall more into kind of one camp than the other?
This is going to probably be a slap in the face to people listening to this and being like, okay, what's your definitive answer? But I'm going to join you up in the fence there. In all seriousness, though, it's a hard one, because at the end of the day, as you said, gaming is so subjective. I don't want to come away from this particular episode and be like, oh, open world games are terrible now, they're the devil, blah, blah, blah. Because they're not. There is a lot of care and attention put into most of them. Obviously not to the same extent for a lot of them. I mean, games like Cyberpunk 2077, the absolute re-release of Skyrim, GTA, those kind of games that at their time were trailblazers, and now they've just become a running joke that will never get a sequel to either of them. I mean, technically there is a sequel in the works, but we don't know. We don't know when they're coming out. But it doesn't mean that they're necessarily, as you said, it doesn't mean they're necessarily bad just because they're an open world game. But I do think developers have to temper expectations when it comes to these games. They have to kind of set a limit and not promise the world, because obviously we've had games like, as I said, Cyberpunk, No Man's Sky, those kind of games that have promised, oh, there's going to be a 24-hour nightlife and every NPC is going to get their own routine and their own lives. And it's on the one hand, sure, that's cool, but is it something that's really needed? Because I mean, don't get me wrong, although I did laugh when Deadly Premonition got this right compared to when Cyberpunk actually came out, but even in Deadly Premonition, they've got routines for the NPCs, and the only reason I think that's great in a game like Deadly Premonition is because their routines actually give you clues about the people within the town itself, within Greenvale. Because if you think about it, what are you going to learn if random Joe walking on the street goes into his house at 5 a.m. and then comes out and gets a bagel at 7 a.m. What's that going to add to the experience is what I'm getting at. And I don't feel as if we do need to have explorable rooms, because I know that is quite a model for open world games, where they'll have certain areas where people will go in, they'll explore this room or this area, but there's not really much there. And that's the talking point right now, going back to Sonic, because I know, Adam, you thought I wasn't going to link Sonic into this episode, but have you actually heard the recent stuff about Sonic Frontiers?
I have not. Do tell.
So recently, as of recording this episode, they released a gameplay trailer and I think it was like a combat trailer, both of which, for me personally, were very underwhelming because the world felt so stiff and like empty. And there's a particular scene in it, and again, like I can't speak for what it'll be like once it comes out. It might be like a lot, grander and everything, but it just felt as if Sonic was so slow. And then he climbs a tower again to get a vantage point, but as soon as he gets to the top, he just like slides down again. As I said, there's no reward for that, and you think, well, is there any point then of exploring this vast world when there's no and maybe they're just hiding it for the final game. Like I don't know how it's going to come out, but one of the other things as well is it was how like Sonic felt so slow in that kind of space. It's a big open field and you expect someone like Sonic to be blasting through, and he was just very, very slow. And if you play a game like Spider-Man, you don't expect him to be walking everywhere. This isn't a GTA mode. Likewise for, if you're playing GTA, you don't expect to be walking everywhere. You expect to be getting in a car because clues in the name, Grand Theft Auto. You want that kind of balance between fun and reward. And don't get me wrong, when I say all of this, I'm not saying that open world games are the only ones guilty of this, because there's like a laundry list of linear games that fall into the same trap. So these you expect to go from one place to the other, and then it doesn't really help. Going back to something you were saying though, I do think there has to be that kind of personal side to it. There has to be that connecting with the player as a whole, if that makes sense. Because even going back to Deadly Premonition, and I know I keep going on about it, but some of the most memorable moments were between the characters, and there were like certain areas you could go explore, and even with like Sleeping Dogs as well, going back to that, you had like all of these areas that you felt attached to because you spent time there, you got to know the characters. I honestly, see off the top of my head, I cannot remember a single place in Watch Dogs bar like the main character's sister's house.
Aberdeen. I just remember because it's an area of Hong Kong.
Oh no, that's for Sleeping Dogs. Sorry, I meant Watch Dogs. Did I say Sleeping Dogs? Yeah, sorry.
Ignore that. Ignore.
Oh no, I remember Aberdeen. Like, how could you forget Aberdeen?
I got the wrong dogs there, sorry.
Yeah, no, there's tons of places in that. There's the restaurant, there's the karaoke bar. I could list all of them off, but for like Ubisoft games, you kind of think a lot of them are spectacle but no substance. And again, that's a general blanket statement, but I feel as if to a degree, not all open world games, but I feel as if there are a lot of worrying trends that are coming from it. Because let's face it, there was a time where platformers were all the rage, so you got all the hard hitters like Mario, Sonic, Zelda, Banjo-Kazooie, as I said, Conker, technically, if you include him. You also got weird spin-offs like Bubsy 3D and all of that. I feel as if this is kind of where open world games are at right now, because it's a bit like what Battle Royale games are going through, because you've got your games like Apex, Warzone, those kind of games, Fortnite, of course, we can't forget about Fortnite. Yeah, at the same time, there is that kind of, as you said, fatigue, and you just get tired of a lot of the same things. And again, before we wrap up, I'm not a video game developer. I'm saying this purely from the perspective of a gamer, because I don't want to be like, oh, this is what you should do with your games, because I don't know the technicalities, how easy it is to do X or Y. But to kind of briefly summarise, I feel as if the more intimate an experience you have with the game, the more you're going to get out of it. And again, when you said about Deus Ex, Mankind Divided, that idea of having a responsive environment, being able to feel like you've accomplished something. I mean, even linear games do that as well, but maybe there should be a bit more linearity. I'm going to ask you one last question, Adam, but do you think that there should be more linear aspects in open world games? I know that's a bit of an oxymoron, but
I think it depends. I'm going to I'm going to keep sitting uncomfortably on this fence, but I think for some of the games it fits. I don't know if this game got it completely right in terms of like the linear environments it had, but I do think Halo Infinite benefited from that idea of having a kind of open hub world and then more kind of linear environments. I don't think all linear environments were great overall, but I think that structure worked well. While I don't know if you're thinking of a sandbox game, I think linearity would really be a detriment to that kind of game. Like imagine like something like Minecraft, you probably wouldn't want linearity in that in any stretch. You want ultimate freedom. I think Rockstar games do it kind of well to an extent, and if you want to have a more crafted story, I think you do have to have an element of linearity, but I think you can blend them well, and I like what a game like Metro Exodus did in that it's and things like the original BioShock did as well, in that it's a linear set of environments you're progressing through. However, each of those environments can be like open world, and some are smaller than others, but you get into a new environment, you get a chance to kind of root around and explore, and I really like that in both games. I like seeing the environmental storytelling in BioShock and kind of poking into the nooks and crannies, and I liked in Metro Exodus you get this kind of rough map, and then you need to get to vantage points to kind of scope things out, and it doesn't give you like quest markers and things. You need to kind of plot your own route to objectives. So I like that kind of element. So again, I think it depends on the game. I think if we're going to talk about, if we set aside sandbox games for the minute, I think if you're talking about those open world games with kind of more story kind of driven ones, I can see linear elements actually being a boon to that. But I think you need to be maybe careful on how you kind of implement them, because I think too much linearity then goes back to LA Noire. It's like, well, why is this just not a linear experience? What's the point in the open world? So I think you can blend the two, but I think you need to do it carefully.
because I mean, if you look at it in a technicality, open world games technically do have a little bit of linearity when it comes to things like the main story, where they kind of fence off the rest of the open world, and if you drift too far away, they're like, whoa, hold on a second, you're playing a story here, you're not playing an open world game anymore. There's obvious exceptions like Minecraft and things like that, but for games like, again, Red Dead Redemption or any GTA game really, I mean, technically Skyrim does it well, because you probably could just walk away unless you're in like the middle of a cave, but there's not as much freedom to walk away whenever you want. But I know what you mean. Like, if you put too much linearity into an open world game, then, as you said, it loses its identity of being an open world game. It just becomes like another bog standard linear game. Are there any kind of closing points that you want to get out there about this topic?
I think, again, it's just, as you said, with kind of all gaming, it's so subjective, and I don't think we could ever come up with a definitive answer. We can come up with answers that work for us, but I don't think there's a definitive answer to this question of which is better, like quote unquote better. It is a matter of preference, and I think for me, I like a balance. I think there are certain games that suit being more linear, but I think there's other games that suit being more open world, and I think there's space in the gaming landscape for both, and I think both should keep existing. But I think as well you can blend elements of both. So gaming is such a broad kind of area that there's space for so many different things. I think there's room for everything, but I think as well you can blend those two ideas successfully.
It's a difficult one, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt.
Going back to the question, I don't know how much it could be said that open world games have reached that limit, because there is so much more that they could do, but I feel as if they go in the same way that they're going just now, with all the collectibles and having the spectacle, as it were, because let's face it, nowadays people want those 4K graphics and all the bells and whistles and things in their video games, and especially when it comes to, I know we rant about Cyberpunk and games like that quite a lot, but that's the kind of main example I can think of, especially with going back to 2016 with No Man's Sky, where they promised literally not just the world, but worlds and thousands of different scenarios, in fact not thousands, millions of different scenarios and planets, and then obviously it turned out it was false. Maybe not so much the fault of the lead developer, but at the same time, again, it's going back to that idea of tempering expectations, because you don't want to keep fanning the flames of my game's going to be the best, because AAA games do that. Whether it is linear or open world, they're always going to do that. They're always going to say their game's the next, especially for open world games. Do you remember when open world games used to be called the next Skyrim or Skyrim with guns?
Yeah, I suppose it's that way, isn't it? It's like GTA Clone was a big title for a while, in the kind of 2000s to 2010s. So yeah, but as you say, Skyrim, because Skyrim was such a hyped game and such a kind of touchstone release that it was almost inevitable things are going to get compared to that. And as you say, it's the kind of model everybody wants to emulate.
Yeah, but now it's Breath of the Wild.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's the one that supplanted it, and I'm sure there'll be something else that'll come out. And GTA 6 will come out, and that'll be the one that is the touchstone title now.
Because if you look at even like the new Sonic Frontiers, that's actually what they say about it. It's like Breath of the Wild, but with Sonic in it, and you roll your eyes and you think, Jesus, really? Is this where we are now? We're calling Sonic Zelda crazy business, but I don't know. I feel as if there has to be a lot of stepping back and reevaluating what's what. And I know that's kind of a blanket term. We could say that about a lot of companies in gaming nowadays, but that's not to say that all open world games are bad. And I just want to leave off on a positive note. Not all open world games nowadays are the worst. They're not bad, but there is a need to, just take a step back and reevaluate.
Yeah, 100% do agree. I think some introspection, retrospection review is never a bad thing.
Seeing that note, I think we could probably wrap up this discussion, don't you?
I think we've covered all the bases now. I think we've traversed the whole world.
Well, on that note, Adam, thank you so much for talking about this topic. It was very thought-provoking and very interesting to research, I have to say.
No, it really was, and my pleasure, and thank you for suggesting it. And I always enjoy these kind of analytical deep dives into kind of broader kind of gaming topics, so my pleasure. As you say, a fascinating read.
I mean, this is an episode we've been talking about for ages, isn't it?
It has been one that's been threatening to threatening to drop, so it's good to actually do the research for it and then to talk about it. So yeah,
we've literally got a document waiting just with the words open world versus linear, and I think that was like raised in probably season 1 of Chatsunami.
Just waiting for the right time for it.
I just keep thinking back, thinking, was it that? Was it not? Oh, I can't believe it. But really glad to have finally spoke about it. So thank you again, Adam. And thank you to all those lovely listeners at home for listening to this episode. If you want to give us your own opinion about whether or not you think the open world games have reached their limit and whether or not you are maybe fatigued a little bit with this genre of video games, please feel free to let us know. So if you go over to the Chatsunami pod page website and reach us via the contacts page, please let us know your experience and thoughts, because we would absolutely love to hear from you. But if you'd like to hear more of our general thoughts and other episodes of the series, you can check us out on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and of course the Chatsunami website under the name Chatsunami. Just look for the red panda and we will see you there. But until then, thank you all so much for listening to this episode. Stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, stay hydrated.